Hi, Mr. O'Toole. Good to see you. Good to have you on our program, as always.
I'm always keen to get on with you, Vashti. Thank you.
I wanted to start off, Mr. O'Toole, with something that you flagged yesterday and then you echoed today throughout your response to the update in the House of Commons. And that was kind of a focus on vaccines and a distribution plan. And I just want to, the government, I noticed in their statement, put out quite a bit of detail about what they have secured access to, up to 429 million doses of 7 different promising COVID-19 vaccine candidates. I'm sure that the co-founder and chairman of Moderna said that Canada is not at the back of the line. Why do you keep saying that Canada is at the back of the line? What proof do you have of that?
Proof they won't answer a single question on it, Vashti. So we don't know the first date vaccines will be received. Almost most of our allies do. In fact, the UK and the US will start receiving in the next few days. And Canadians are going to be asking questions, and they deserve answers. With the Pfizer vaccine, for example, which is the first kind of out the gate with higher numbers of accuracy than even the Moderna, we can't even get an answer on whether we have the freezer capacity. Vashti, I know from my own outreach that there'll be vast parts of Canada that won't get that vaccine because this government does not have a logistics plan in place. And they also seemed to have put all their eggs in the CanSino, the China deal that fell apart in August, and then they've been scrambling since. So this is a debacle. And the very fact that we had Minister Haiju for 4 hours and she wouldn't answer one question should tell you that we're pushing because there's a real problem here.
I take your point on the lack of answers. Certainly, we've had various ministers on to ask as well. I will say Minister LeBlanc did indicate that there would be 6 million doses arriving in January should the candidate get approved. And to your point of kind of putting all their eggs into one basket, I would only point to the fact that this federal government secured an agreement with Moderna for the 20 million doses 2 days before the U.S. did and 2 weeks before anyone in Europe did. So it's not exactly the timeline that you're presenting.
Well, you're giving me more details than the government is, Vashti. That's troubling in itself. They won't mention the portfolio they talk about. People should ask about that. I don't care how many vaccines we're getting in 2023. I want to know how many we're getting in the next 60 days. They won't answer that. We're a G7 country. We have the ability to manufacture. So the Prime Minister has misled people on that from the start. And they won't answer questions about whether we will receive. Pfizer won't give vaccines to Canada if they're going to be spoiled. They have to be stored at -70 or colder. We don't have that capacity in many provinces, Vashti. So this is a logistics operation. This isn't a PR operation, which the Prime Minister loves that type of assignment. This is about fighting to keep our economy moving. That's where we needed rapid tests faster. We need the vaccine to round the corner of COVID-19. We were late on both things, and we're one of the leading countries in the world. I think that's unacceptable.
I guess my question to you on the vaccines is, though, and again, I understand the validity of asking the questions around the timeline, but when you say we are at the back of the line, parts of this country won't get it, are you not getting ahead of yourself? And I get that you're not getting the answers yet, but are you not getting ahead of yourself and kind of creating fear about something that doesn't yet exist?
Why won't the government answer your question either, Vashti? Doesn't that give you some sense of fear? I'm a family that actually had COVID. This is a real issue Canadians are worried about. It's keeping people up at night. The health minister won't answer a question. We know when Indonesia is getting it. We know when Mexico is getting it. We know when the UK, we know when 2.7 billion other people are getting it. Is my question unreasonable, Vashti? No. This is what Canadians want to know.
And I'm not saying it's unreasonable.
The very fact that they won't answer is an absence of leadership. It's actually negligence.
But is it leadership to tell places that they're not going to get it and tell Canadians that we're at the back of the line and make them afraid about that?
Well, we're behind 2.7 billion. How about that? I'm not sure how long the line is, but think about it. All we want to know is when is it coming? All I want to know, do we have the freezer capacity for the Pfizer vaccine, the first one coming down the chute? Why can't I get an answer on freezers? They gave freezers to Loblaws as part of a PR stunt. I'd like to know, do we have pharmaceutical grade freezers? I'd hope CBC is asking these questions too, because these are the frontline questions. We have no economy if we can't round this pandemic. So I will work with them if we can help speed this up in any way possible. We voted with them for the relief programs to help Canadians. We fought for better response for small businesses. I'm asking very reasonable questions in the middle of a pandemic. And I don't care about the portfolio and what we're getting 18 months from now. What are we getting in the next 60 days? And why won't they answer the question?
Okay, you mentioned those relief programs, and I did want to ask you about that because within this fiscal update is a projection for the size of the deficit and also some amendments to relief programs and some new promises for additional relief coming down the pipe. I heard you yesterday say that you felt like the deficit was too high, and then today you and your finance critic criticized the size of it as well and sort of said something along the lines of that you supported half of the measures. Can you expand on that? What exactly don't you support that makes up this deficit?
Well, what we've said is some of the assistance programs that we have supported, Vashi, the CERB program, the wage subsidy, others, we were actually pushing for smarter wage subsidies. That accounts for about half of not even half of the deficit. We didn't agree with some of the expansion to students for the CERB and other things that weren't effective on leveraging jobs. We also don't see any details. The new program for the travel and tourism industry, no details in this, even though, as Chris Hall said off the top, this is kind of a stealth budget in terms of the book and there's going to be legislation needed for benefits, but there's not even any details for these sectors that are literally on their knees. So that's what we want to see. Anything that preserves our economic activity, that keeps people working, that allows our country to get through this crisis, rapid tests being a big tool for that, we're going to support. We want to get through this, and we don't want the budget and our pandemic to be a period for experimenting with the economy. We want every single sector to roar back to its full strength.
I just want to make sure, though, that I fully understand that, because my impression was that the deficit is, it started around $30 billion. Okay, that's separate. The majority of the $350 rest of the $1 billion is direct spending plus deferred taxes. So the only thing you said there that you didn't support was the extra CERB for students. That certainly wouldn't take the deficit down too much.
We've wanted a faster approach to saving jobs. So here's the question you should ask the ministers, Vashi. Why did they underspend the wage subsidy and overspend on the CERB? Because their slow response led to tens of thousands of more Canadians losing their jobs than they needed to. That was the biggest failure. So we don't need more no-job programs. We need job security. We need jobs for all Canadians. That was really what they got wrong. It's all in their own numbers. Whenever you're talking tens of billions and they're out in terms of jobs lost and people needing assistance, that's why a recovery needs to have a plan to get everyone working.
Respectfully, Mr. O'Toole, though, my question for the minister will come when the minister comes on. My question was to you, and you didn't really answer it. If you say you only support half the size of the deficit, I don't understand what you would not have spent money on. It's either deferrals or direct supports to Canadians, and the only direct support you identified was to students. That certainly wouldn't whittle the deficit down too much.
What we would have done differently, Vashi, is we would have had the wage subsidy out faster to save jobs. They overspent on the CERB. And this is the problem. If you're looking, they have no plan after March. And in many ways, this is they're set up for the election. The economy, the long-term prosperity of Canada is on fire. They've got no plan for it. We've got the highest unemployment in the G7 other than Italy. And there is no plan for when that CERB will be wrapped down because a lot of the businesses didn't save the jobs. So that's what we would have done differently. We want Canadians working, so that's why we support energy, we support softwood deals and getting better trade deals. That's got to be the focus, getting Canadians working, not experimenting, building back better. We don't need slogans, we need rolling up our sleeves and hard work.
Okay, Mr. O'Toole, I'm out of time. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's Erin O'Toole. He's the leader of the Federal Conservative Party. I want to go straight over to the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh. He's in the West Block of the House of Commons. Hi, Mr. Singh. Good to have you back on the show.
Good to see you, Ms. Capellos.
So today in the House of Commons, after the finance minister delivered the economic update, Peter Julian, your colleague, stood up and criticized it and said that it shows austerity is coming. I'm just wondering how that can be the position of your party when there's a $381 billion deficit and a $100 billion stimulus package coming.
Well, if you look at their economic update in the next years, past year 2 and 3, we see clearly cuts to the help that people need. And my biggest concern is the Liberal government's unwilling to look at revenue. They're unwilling to ask the wealthiest, the ultra rich, to pay their fair share. They're unwilling to really tax the web giants that are making not just profits, but in some cases record profits off the backs of people in this pandemic, make money off of Canadians but pay virtually no tax here. We've asked for a tax on pandemic profiteering, on the excess profits made during the pandemic, and a wealth tax on those who've got fortunes of over 20 million, so we can continue to invest in a sustained way in helping people. And if we don't do that, we know what's going to happen, what's already happened. The wealthiest have made massive gains, but everyone else, small businesses and everyday folks, have felt the pain of the pandemic. And absent any sustained long-term investments and support, then that's going to continue to happen. More and more people are going to be struggling while the wealthy continue to expand their wealth.
Okay, let me just pick up on the last point you made around taxation, because though they're they aren't using taxation to grow revenue in the specific way that your party wants them to, there are measures in here around taxation and particularly around the wealthy. For example, limiting deductions for stock options and taxation on big web giant companies. That is something I'm looking at page 117 right now. They've got, $7 billion of revenue by the end of the next 5 years, just because of that. So in fact, it would appear that they are actually addressing the issue you just laid out, just not in the specific way you want them to.
Not at all. Actually, what they're doing with the web giants, and it's really tricky because they're trying to make it seem like they're actually doing something different. All they're doing is applying GST that is actually a consumer tax, but it creates a level playing field so that if you buy goods and service through a technology company that's local and Canadian, that same goods and service tax will apply to online giant like Amazon. But it's actually not taxing them in the sense of they're still not paying any corporate tax in Canada. They still have these loopholes where Facebook and Netflix pay virtually zero taxes in Canada. Applying a GST is just basic leveling the playing field and saying whether you're an international company or a local company, you should absolutely be charging the same GST. But that's not actually making them pay their fair share. What France is doing is charging 3% on the revenue of these web giants in France. So that's actually a concrete measure to actually make them pay their fair share. We're saying that why is it 6 years into their government, they still have not actually made these web giants pay a single, effectively a cent of actual corporate tax or actually revenue-based taxes that they make off of Canadians in Canada. Applying a GST is really meaningless. I mean, it's important in terms of leveling the playing field, but it's meaningless in going after the fact that they don't pay their fair share here.
The stock options is something that I know that you've highlighted in the past. It's something the Liberals promised before. It looks like now they're moving on that as well. So again, they are pulling some levers, just not exactly the way in which you wanted them to.
Well, let's just push back on the frame of exactly. They're not taxing the wealthiest profit-making corporations in the world. They're not taxing. They're basically are getting a free ride in Canada. So it's not, they're not doing it the same way. They're not doing it. They're literally not taxing the richest companies that are making the biggest profits in the world right now. Amazon, which we've all heard the title, all heard the records that they're breaking in terms of how wealthy they are. They're not paying any taxes in Canada. And Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government haven't fixed that. When it comes to the stock option loophole, this is something that the Liberals campaigned on for years, over 6 years. They've said they were going to do it. And now it looks like they're announcing that they might do it. Again, that doesn't give me much confidence. We're talking about a tax on the wealth of those who've got extreme wealth, over $20 million. Pandemic profiteering taxes, a company that's made massive record profits off the backs of Canadians, they should be paying their fair share. And web giants that pay no taxes really in terms of their actual revenue that they're making in Canada off of Canadians continue to pay effectively no taxes based on what this Liberal government's doing. It might be the fact that there's a revolving door in the Liberal government's PMO office where web giants have their staff members work in government, then end up working in Facebook and Google. And clearly we're not seeing any action on this. This is a massive failure. And if we don't tax the wealthiest corporations that are making profit now, then the pain is going to be felt by people. They're going to see cuts to their services. And that's why we're saying we've got to talk about revenue.
Okay, speaking of people, I just want to switch gears because something else that I heard you highlight earlier today was sectoral support. So what the government has laid out in this particular document is a new program that they're announcing that would be loans backed by the government at lower interest rates that would be easier to access and payable over a number of years. And that's geared, the government says, to, for example, those in the hospitality or the restaurant industry. I heard you talking about how you would like to see more support for people who actually work in those industries. My guess is that's what the wage subsidy is for. There's a big update for that, and the various other direct supports already announced. What in addition to those would you like to see?
Well, the loan program doesn't work. We've seen the evidence of the LEAF program. It does not work. Giving an
This is a new one. It hasn't even started yet.
Well, we've seen the concept of giving loans, and effectively what they're actually doing is the banks were going to be the ones that actually make the profit. So the government's backing the loan, but it's banks that are actually getting the income from the loan. So banks are basically going to make off like bandits in this proposal, backstopped by the government. So it's a way to shift profits again to the banks, but it doesn't actually provide the direct help that these hard-hit industries need. What they need is direct financial support. And what we want to see is for things like the aerospace and the airline industry, for some of the workers in NAV Canada that keep air controllers, that keep our airways safe, some of the workers that maintain and keep our airplanes moving, if they don't have supports to continue to do their work, if they're not working and putting in those hours, then they're going to no longer be qualified or certified to do the work. And they're not going to be an industry where you can just mothball, shut it down, and then turn it back on unless we provide the supports for them to continue to work. So we wanted sector-specific, direct financial supports that are tied to employment. These loans also aren't really tied to employment. They're loans backed by the government. They're going to benefit the banks that aren't really going to give the support that the sectors need. I spoke to sector workers in the aerospace and the airline industry, the flight attendants, those who work in the rental car agencies, those who are the air controllers, those who are the mechanics that keep the airplanes going. They need direct supports. And so this government's failed to provide that direct support. And on other areas like childcare, again, failed to live up to their own promise. They promised to bring in $2 billion. It was a motion passed unanimously. We all voted on it. They said, of course, they agree. And now in this economic update, they broke their own promise, that $2 billion to keep the existing childcare spaces. That's just a minimum starting point.
Okay, well, I'm sure the government will have something to say in response to that, so I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Singh. Thanks very much for your time, as always. That's Jagmeet Singh. He's the leader of the NDP. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.